I wish I didn't have to share this with you. If it were up to me, I would keep this secret locked away forever. The reality is as terrifying as it is incomprehensible. So I'll cut to the chase. There won't be a year 2024. There wasn't a 2023 or 2022 either, but I'll explain that later. You're probably thinking, who is this person? And what gives them the right to make such outrageous statements? I'm an archaeologist, and it's my duty to ask those kinds of questions. Challenging questions that demand evidence and undeniable proof. My guide, Professor Maple, used to say, "Trust is earned, not given. Always back your claims with evidence." And until today, that was my mantra. Our work at Orion Excavations centered around the temporal signatures of artifacts. You see, every century, every decade, every year leaves its unique imprint on the artifacts. We used a lot of sophisticated tools, but the most crucial was essentially a complex database. That was where we logged the temporal signatures and looked for patterns in data spanning over centuries. Only Professor Maple was supposed to have full access to our system, but that changed a few hours ago when he had to rush out due to a personal crisis. There was still work to be done, and I was the only one at the site that he trusted enough to do it. Initially, I thought Professor Maple had made the right decision by entrusting me with his access codes, but later, alone in the excavation site, with only the flicker of the emergency lights for company, I began to doubt. I had always been curious about the restricted files in our system, the ones that only Professor Maple himself could access, and I knew that I'd never get another opportunity to discover what they contained. By the time I'd finished my work, I couldn't resist my curiosity any longer. Even though I knew that no one was at the site with me, I glanced around nervously before opening the files. I had expected to find something groundbreaking, perhaps even scandalous, but all I found was another set of databases. They were identical to the ones I was familiar with, but with one minor difference. The temporal signatures hadn't changed since 2010. It didn't take long for me to realize that this was the real data. Professor Maple had been tampering with our tools to produce false readings, and he'd been doing it for years. But why? I couldn't comprehend it. Moreover, if his data were accurate, time had stopped progressing 10 years ago. The door banged open. Professor Maple stormed in, shaking off dust from his hat. He mumbled something about his daughter having a fever, and asked me how my work was going. But I wasn't listening. I was too busy trying to hide my actions. I should have been more careful. Professor Maple recognized the deer-in-the-headlights look on my face, and in a few swift steps, he was peering over my shoulder. There was no way to conceal what I was doing. My heart dropped. This would mean my job. Perhaps even legal repercussions. Professor Maple placed a hand on my shoulder. He told me I looked exhausted, and that I should head home and rest. I was stunned. I had been accessing confidential information, and he was just going to let me off the hook? The stern old man tightened his grip on my shoulder. His piercing green eyes were trying to warn me about something, but I couldn't decipher what. Not immediately. It was only when I rose from the office chair that I noticed the figure standing in the corner of the room. In the dim lights of the excavation site, who could say how long it had been standing there, observing me? When I looked at it directly, it seemed like just an ordinary woman in a black business suit. But from the corner of my eye, it appeared as something entirely different. Something non-human and unsettling. Something with mottled gray skin and a face that was featureless apart from a gaping, toothless mouth. Something with too many fingers. Something that seemed to slither rather than walk when it moved. I opened my mouth to scream, but Professor Maple cut me off. He flung the site door open with a crash and suggested we walk out to our cars together. It was taking all of his strength to keep his voice steady. I couldn't resist glancing over my shoulder at the figure in the corner as we left, but when I did, it was gone. It hadn't been just my imagination. Professor Maple had seen it too. I was certain of it, but he was keeping his lips sealed. I had never seen anyone so terrified. Professor Maple glanced at each darkened office and vacant corridor we passed, as though he expected some unspeakable creature to reach out and drag him inside. When we reached the parking lot, he climbed into his dust-covered car like a man facing his doom, barely even wiping the windshield before he drove off. He still hadn't spoken a word to me, and I had a dreadful feeling that I'd never see him again. I was left alone in the excavation site parking lot, or was I? Reaching out from my own car door, I felt a presence behind me. I was sure that if I turned, the figure in the black suit would be there, just inches behind me, ready to wrap its thin fingers around my throat. Of course, when I did spin around, there was nothing but falling sand. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was there, just beyond the corners of my vision. I told myself that it was just fear and stress, that Professor Maple's paranoia was affecting me as well, but I didn't believe it. Not really. Even once I got back home, behind a locked door with a warm cup of coffee in my hands, my heartbeat still hadn't slowed down. Time was repeating itself. It should have been impossible, but the data was irrefutable. Suddenly, I remembered Alex Stone. Alex was a friend from my undergraduate program, a large, boisterous guy who always smelled of tobacco, beer, and some other unidentifiable odor. He boasted that he used the dark web frequently. None of us wanted to ponder why, and that he had created a hidden forum there, a place where archaeologists could share their findings anonymously with one another. Alex vanished a few years later, but his dark web, free speech forum for archaeologists was still active. If there was anyone who could explain the anomaly that I had encountered, that was where I would find them. Sharing my discovery would be a violation of Professor Maple's trust, but I had to know. The feeling that some sort of presence was in the room with me kept intensifying. I had a terrible suspicion that if I didn't uncover the truth soon, I would lose my sanity by dawn. I was just about to hit submit when I felt 8 long, multi-jointed fingers close around my head. Its vice-like grip twisted me around, and I found myself face to face with the thing from the site. Up close, the illusion of a dull woman in a black suit fell away completely. It hurt to look at, and not just because of its slimy, mottled gray skin and extra limbs. It was how it blinked and shifted, like it was existing in more than 3 dimensions at once. I shut my eyes tight, but I couldn't block out the noise its mouth made, a dry, raspy sound like wind through dead leaves. It was speaking to me, but I couldn't understand its words, not until it wormed one of its cold, slimy fingers into my ear. I squirmed at the invasive sensation, but seconds later, something clicked in my brain, and I could understand what it was saying, although I would have preferred not to. "Are you certain you want an answer to your question? Really certain?" I screamed. It tightened its grip until I thought my head would shatter. The pain was unbearable. "Go on, human. Tell us what you think you know." The years, the days, they're repeating themselves. Why? A sickening screech sound echoed in my skull. I think it was laughing. "So we can feed. We loop you through time again and again, making the simulation just a little worse each time. We're going to squeeze the delicious pain and fear from your simple human brains until there's nothing left." "Please," I whispered. "Don't kill me." "Kill you? You mean right now? Whatever for? We have all eternity to kill you as many times as we wish." "No, you have a different purpose. You're going to share the truth with your fellow humans. We'd like to see how they'll handle it at this stage of the simulation." Its mouth curled into a horrifying imitation of a smile. "We're scientists too, you know, and if I refuse, we could always drop you down a few levels in the simulation. Why don't you take a look at what's coming in a few of your so-called years, and tell us what you think?" A cold, dusty wind blasted my face. My eyes snapped open. I was laying inside a shattered stone structure. Grayish-white sand fell from the black sky overhead, but I could barely see it. There were no lights anywhere. I should have been worrying about where I was, who I was, or even when I was, but suddenly all I cared about was food and warmth. The hunger was like a fist crushing my gut. How long had it been since I'd eaten? Days? Weeks? I was too weak to do anything but crawl toward the end of the structure. The air was so cold it hurt. My clothes were just tattered rags, and when I tried to wrap them around me, I realized that my skin was covered in strange, pale lumps. Spurred on by sick curiosity, I touched one, and a jolt of pain shot up my arm. Something like a tiny, ink-colored worm had squirmed inside, then burrowed deeper into my flesh. I grabbed my head in horror, then felt a chunk of hair slip out between my fingers. I was so cold, so hungry. It took ages to drag my skeletally thin body to the end of the shattered stone structure, and even then, I knew I wouldn't have the energy to make it much further. There was no food, no shelter from the blistering cold. And it wasn't just the wind that was howling. 4 blacker-than-black shapes were loping toward me through the darkness. I couldn't fully see their bodies, just their eyes, burning like hot coals in the darkness. They looked even hungrier than I was. The howls chilled my blood. I tried to scramble backwards, but they were faster than I was, a lot faster. I slipped in the gray sludge at the bottom of the structure and heard a low growl behind me. Then they lunged. I cried out as teeth sank into my leg. My eyes snapped open. I was back in my living room, my skull still trapped between those long, nightmarish fingers. "We can send you back to that moment whenever we wish, as often as we like. How many times do you think you can be eaten alive before your brain shuts down completely? Would you like to find out? Or maybe we should drop you down a few levels further. What do you think? Do you still refuse to fulfill your purpose? It released me from its grip, allowing me to shake my head and vomit onto the carpet. That simulation of the future, or whatever it had been, had felt just as real as my daily life. The cold, starvation, and disease that I'd suffered were all proof that the monstrous thing in front of me was telling the truth. We really do live in a simulation, a time loop. It becomes a little worse each year so that they can feed on our fear and suffering. They've shown me hell, and it has no bottom. As I said, I don't want to be telling you this. I wish I could forget it myself, but that isn't my purpose. I have to share what I've discovered. It's the only way I have to avoid the future for as long as possible. Make no mistake, they're here. They're in control, and the future will be here sooner than you think.